Have you ever noticed how you can consciously want something, truly deeply desire a better job, or a healthier romantic relationship, or maybe just more financial stability?
Or even just a baseline sense of daily peace.
Yeah, exactly. But
Mm.
somehow, almost like clockwork, you keep ending up in the exact same frustrating
All
situation,
right, you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning.
asking yourself, why am I back here again? Why am I dating the exact same emotionally unavailable personality, just wearing a different face?
Or why am I struggling against the exact same financial ceiling I was hitting 5 years ago?
It is incredibly maddening.
Yeah,
And if you are listening to this, you are not alone in that frustration. Welcome. Today, we are going to get to the absolute bottom of that exact phenomenon.
we really are.
This is another custom-tailored deep dive
Yep.
designed specifically for you. And the materials we have on the table today offer a profound paradigm shift.
A completely different way of looking at things.
Right. We are looking at a fascinating, highly effective, and completely anonymous collection of transcripts from a personal development and psychological framework.
And our mission for today's deep dive is pretty bold.
It is. We are going to completely decode the hidden subconscious programming that secretly runs our adult lives.
We are going to explore exactly how the adaptations you made as a tiny child are currently and actively sabotaging your adult intentions.
And we will look at why simply thinking positive almost always fails on a biological level. Plus, most importantly, we're going to break down the exact mechanics of how to rewire your nervous system to finally get unstuck.
Because what makes these materials so compelling is how they synthesize neurobiology, deep psychology, and energetic concepts.
Without relying on the clinical jargon that usually makes these topics feel so inaccessible, it gets right to the root of the human behavioral loop. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Setting the stage for this, we really need to emphasize that today is entirely about understanding the mechanical why behind our most baffling self-sabotaging behaviors.
Because we so often judge ourselves for these repeating loops.
Oh, constantly. We label ourselves as undisciplined or unlucky or just fundamentally broken. But this framework removes the moral failing from our struggles.
Which is such a relief.
It is. It places those struggles squarely in the realm of biological adaptation. It's just subconscious survival mechanisms. We know the mind acts as an archivist, and the body is the vault where all the emotional files are stored.
So what we are doing today is looking at how those files were originally created.
Exactly, and why your brain insists on keeping them open decades later, and the precise biological process required to finally close them.
By the end of our conversation, the goal is for you to view your own resistance, your fears, and your repeating patterns through a highly analytical yet deeply compassionate lens.
Because a compassionate but analytical lens is exactly what is required here.
It is, because analyzing our own past conditioning can feel incredibly daunting. It often feels like walking into a minefield.
It really does.
But the way this material approaches the psyche makes it feel like we are solving an intricate engineering problem rather than just excavating old pain.
So let's jump right into the foundational concept from the transcripts.
Right, the metaphor of life energy. It asks us to picture a young child's natural life energy as a rushing, unified, powerful river.
Just think about a toddler in their natural state.
They are inherently joyful.
They are incredibly resilient, and they are entirely connected to their immediate desires.
If a toddler wants to sing, they just sing at the top of their lungs without a single second thought about pitch or audience.
And if they fall down, they cry intensely for a minute, they process the shock, and then they're right back up.
Utterly fascinated by a beetle on the sidewalk.
Exactly. They don't hold on to resentment about the fall. They don't have performance anxiety about the singing.
Their energy is a single, focused, massive stream of pure existence. There is no fragmentation. But then, as we grow, the material notes that this river inevitably splinters.
And to understand why that river splinters, we have to look at the stark biological reality of the human infant.
Right, because a human baby is born entirely physically helpless.
Completely. If you compare us to a foal that can stand up and run hours after birth, a human infant survival is 100% dependent on its caregivers for years.
So we are biologically and evolutionarily wired to prioritize attachment to our caregivers over our own authenticity.
Survival requires connection. There is simply no alternative. So the infant's developing nervous system is constantly scanning the immediate environment, processing thousands of micro-interactions to answer one vital question.
Am I safe here?
Exactly. Am I accepted by the people who keep me alive? When a child experiences moments where they're not fully accepted, seen, or safely held, the system registers a threat.
And this is crucial for you listening. It does not have to be massive overt trauma.
Not at all. The system is just as reactive to chronic, subtle misattunement. It can be as simple as a parent routinely sighing when the child asks a question,
Or being told you were only lovable when you were perfectly quiet.
or only receiving warmth when you bring home perfect grades. The child's nervous system perceives that conditional acceptance as a literal life or death threat to their survival.
That is the point of disconnection right there. That is the exact moment the unified river hits a dam and is forced to splinter.
To adapt to this conditional environment, the child subconsciously compromises.
They splinter their rushing river of life energy. With every painful experience, every micro-rejection, every time they are shamed for being too loud or too needy, a branch of that beautiful river breaks off.
It diverts into a stagnant pool. The overall life energy, the main current, diminishes. It loses its force.
Because the child analyzes the family's emotional ecosystem and realizes, okay, to survive here, to belong to this group and guarantee my food and shelter, I have to pay a toll.
And that toll is a piece of their authenticity.
They adopt the parents' unexpressed anxieties, they internalize the family's unwritten rules, and they actively shut down the parts of themselves that the family system cannot tolerate.
They become smaller, quieter.
Or maybe they swing the exact opposite way and become overly achieving, constantly trying to purchase the safety of belonging through performance.
Which highlights a heartbreaking but vital psychological fact from the sources. When a child faces unbearable emotional pain or a profound lack of emotional containment from a parent, the child does not hate the parent.
They simply cannot afford to.
Right. Hating the sole providers of your survival is biologically too risky. It would mean accepting that the universe is chaotic and the people in charge of your life are incompetent.
And that is way too terrifying for a developing brain to process.
So the child does something incredibly tragic but highly adaptive for immediate survival. The child hates themselves.
They internalize the failure of the environment as a fundamental structural flaw within their own being.
The subconscious logic dictates, if my parent cannot love me exactly as I am, it is not because my parent is lacking emotional capacity.
It must be because I am inherently unlovable. I am defective.
This is the core wound. This is the invisible burden that the child packs into their psychological architecture and carries straight into adulthood.
Continuously trying to fix a defect that does not actually exist.
We spend decades, sometimes our entire lives, trying to compensate for a defect that was never ours to begin with.
It was just an elegant, desperate coping mechanism to survive an environment that couldn't fully attune to us.
Exactly.
But this is where I want to push back on the material a bit, or at least ask for deeper clarification, because the transcripts make a massive claim here.
They do.
We are so heavily conditioned by mainstream psychology to believe that changing these core foundational beliefs takes decades of therapy. We expect agonizing, slow progress.
But the sources claim that true change doesn't always take years.
Right. They suggest it can happen in a single instantaneous moment. From a neurobiological standpoint, how's that actually possible?
It is a brilliant question. We are talking about neural pathways that have been reinforced millions of times over 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, how does a belief like, I am fundamentally flawed, just vanish in a moment?
The mechanics behind this instantaneous shift become incredibly sound when you look at the precise process of memory reconsolidation.
Okay, break that down for us.
For a long time, neuroscience believed that once a memory was consolidated into long-term storage, it was permanent. You could only build new competing memories over it.
Which is why therapy historically took so long.
Right, you were trying to outcompete the old trauma with new logic.
Yeah.
But the paradigm shift in these transcripts aligns with newer understandings of how emotional memory actually functions.
When an adult is guided to fully reactivate the specific subconscious emotional memory of that original severance,
The exact moment the river splintered.
that memory becomes temporarily labile.
It becomes unstable and open to editing.
So you aren't just talking about remembering the event logically, like, oh, yes, my mother yelled at me when I was 6.
No, not at all. You have to bring the actual somatic, physical feeling of that terror back online in the present moment.
The emotional circuit must be fully activated.
Precisely. And while that circuit is open and vulnerable, the adult introduces a deeply contradictory truth.
Because the child in the memory believed the rejection meant they were fundamentally flawed.
But the adult, utilizing their fully formed prefrontal cortex, looks at that exact same reactivated memory and realizes, wait, I was just a child.
I was entirely innocent.
The inability of the adults around me to provide unconditional love was entirely about their own limitations.
Their own unhealed generational trauma, not my worthiness.
When that profound, undeniable realization collides with the open emotional memory, it doesn't just compete with the old belief.
It actually rewrites the synaptic connections.
The old belief is literally erased and replaced at the cellular level.
That collision of the old feeling and the new truth. The text described the result of this as the diverted branches of the river suddenly snapping violently back into the main current.
The severed connection is instantaneously reestablished.
And what I found fascinating in the transcripts are the physical reports of this moment. People don't just say, oh, I think differently now.
No, they report a literal physical sensation of a crushing weight lifting off their chest or shoulders.
They feel lighter almost instantly. It's as if they have been expending massive amounts of metabolic energy, holding a 100-pound weight of self-loathing above their heads for 40 years.
And in one moment of memory reconsolidation, they simply drop it.
The energy that was tied up in maintaining that false belief is suddenly liberated, and it flows right back into their nervous system.
It is a massive liberation of psychic energy. However, while the internal shift can occur in a fraction of a second, the material is careful to note that the external reality takes time to catch up.
Right. Behavioral habits take time.
The brain has spent decades building robust, heavily myelinated neural pathways based on the belief I am unworthy.
It has built coping mechanisms, defensive postures, and relational habits entirely around that belief.
So when you obliterate the foundational core belief, the brain needs a processing period. It might take weeks or months to prune away those obsolete behavioral pathways.
And lay down new, efficient tracks based on the new reality of worthiness.
The immediate feeling of relief is instant, but the complete transformation of how one walks through the world is a process of integration.
That integration period is fascinating because it forces us to look at how we have built our current lives around those old beliefs.
Exactly.
If the brain takes time to lay down those new neural tracks, what happens to our behavior in the meantime? Because that lag time seems like the perfect window for self-sabotage to creep back in.
It definitely is.
And this leads right into the second part of the transcripts. The materials pivot here to discuss the subconscious blueprint.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes, they introduce this concept called the amygdala's stage play. And this challenges the entire foundation of the modern self-help industry.
It really does. When we think about personal development, the prevailing narrative is always about accumulation.
We think we need to read 50 more books, optimize our morning routines, learn 3 new high-income skills.
Basically bolt on layers of new, shiny armor to our existing flawed selves so we can finally be good enough to succeed.
But this framework insists that to reach our higher potential, we don't need to add a single thing.
We need to subtract.
We must actively shed the limiting beliefs, the stored emotional traumas, and the protective behavioral mask we recorded in our subconscious.
We are already whole underneath the adaptations. We just have to chisel away the false identities we built to survive our childhood environments.
The concept of shedding rather than accumulating is profoundly disruptive to a culture obsessed with optimization.
It implies that your optimal self isn't a distant, exhausting destination you have to desperately climb toward.
It is your default natural state once you remove the neurological interference.
And to understand what that interference actually is, we have to look closely at how unhealed emotional memory actively, aggressively dictates our adult reality.
The sources point specifically to the role of the amygdala.
We all know the amygdala is our primary threat detection center, the alarm bell that triggers fight, flight, or freeze.
But the psychological framework we are examining proposes that the amygdala's role is far more complex than just detecting immediate physical danger.
It acts almost like an obsessive casting director for the grand stage play of your life.
Constantly seeking to recreate the specific emotional conditions of your past. I want to break down that casting director analogy because it explains so much of the madness we feel in our daily lives.
Absolutely.
Let's say you, the listener, have an incredibly deep, unhealed childhood wound regarding feeling invisible or perhaps being subjected to unpredictable, volatile anger from a caregiver.
Okay.
You grow up and your conscious, logical brain says, I am going to make absolutely sure I never, ever date anyone who makes me feel invisible, and I will never tolerate a bad temper.
Consciously, that is your stated, ironclad goal.
But your amygdala, your subconscious casting director, has a completely different, much more powerful agenda.
The amygdala holds the original script of your unhealed trauma.
So when you walk into a networking event or a party, the amygdala scans the room. It completely bypasses the 50 emotionally regulated, healthy people who would treat you wonderfully.
They don't even register on your radar. You might even find them boring.
Instead, your amygdala zeroes in on the exact person whose specific, subtle micro-expressions and emotional dysfunction perfectly match the frequency of your childhood wound.
It literally generates a feeling of intense chemistry or attraction to draw you toward the one person who will inevitably trigger those exact feelings of invisibility or fear.
Which brings us to the most agonizing universal question we ask ourselves when we are stuck in these loops.
Why do we do this?
Why do we actively, albeit subconsciously, repeat the pain? Why do we keep attracting the same type of exploitative boss or the same emotionally unavailable partners?
It feels like a curse.
Yeah.
It feels like we are fundamentally broken or that the universe is actively punishing us.
But the biological truth is that the brain isn't punishing you at all.
The brain operates on the fundamental principle of completion.
The nervous system hates an open loop.
It intimately remembers the trauma of the past where you felt powerless, where the life energy got blocked.
And where you internalize that terrible belief about your own worth.
So the amygdala meticulously recreates the scenario. It casts the perfect actors to play the roles of your critical mother or your absent father.
Entirely so that this time, you can process the unhealed emotion.
It is trying to provide you with an opportunity to rewrite the ending of the play.
It brings the monster back out of the closet, sets up the exact same terrifying scenario so that the adult version of you can finally defeat it.
Close the loop and clear the subconscious code.
If we look at the principle of completion, that implies our subconscious is actively seeking out emotional danger to resolve a historical conflict.
Yes.
But from a purely evolutionary standpoint, wouldn't it be safer and require far less metabolic energy to just avoid the danger entirely?
You would think so.
Why does the brain risk a massive new trauma like a devastating divorce or a career collapse just to close an old loop? Why not just leave the loop open and stay away from the fire?
Because an open emotional loop represents a constant low-grade drain on the system's resources.
Imagine leaving 50 heavy applications running in the background of your computer.
Eventually, the entire system slows down and crashes. The unhealed trauma is a massive energetic leak.
So the brain calculates that the short-term risk of recreating the trauma is worth the potential long-term payoff of finally resolving it.
And reclaiming that bound-up energy, the system is always pushing for wholeness.
And this is where the transcripts introduce a critical warning about how we handle these repeating scenarios. They discuss the profound difference between soft nudges and hard crashes.
The system, whether you view it as your own neurobiology or the broader mechanics of your life, sends gentle signals to wake us up to these unhealed patterns.
A soft nudge might be a persistent, nagging feeling of dissatisfaction in a relationship.
It might be a minor, recurring conflict with a coworker.
Or it might just be a quiet, intuitive whisper in your gut that says, something about this dynamic is fundamentally misaligned.
And those whispers are so incredibly easy to ignore.
We rationalize them away constantly. We tell ourselves, well, every relationship takes hard work, or nobody actually likes their job, or I'm just being overly sensitive.
We ignore the soft nudges because actually confronting them would require us to disrupt the status quo.
To disappoint our parents, or to face the terrifying prospect of the unknown, we prioritize societal expectations over our own internal alarms.
But the transcripts are clear. If we consistently ignore the soft nudges, the system escalates.
It has to, because the biological imperative is your growth and the resolution of that open loop.
If you refuse to listen to a whisper, the system will eventually use a megaphone.
Those gentle nudges mutate into harsh, unavoidable experiences. A minor recurring argument turns into a devastating, life-altering betrayal.
A feeling of chronic fatigue and burnout turns into a major systemic physical autoimmune crisis.
The system will literally orchestrate a hard crash, a major life disruption that forces you to a dead stop.
To demand the necessary awakening that you were desperately trying to avoid.
The intensity of the pain increases until the agony of staying the same finally outweighs the terror of change.
It's a brutal mechanism, but an undeniably effective one.
The universe, or your nervous system, essentially says, if you won't change your direction, I will burn the road down behind you.
Which is terrifying but true.
This reality actually directly answers a question I've had about conscious goal setting, which the transcripts cover extensively when they discuss the nervous system's veto power.
We live in a hyperproductive culture obsessed with intentions.
We write down our 5-year plans, we create elaborate vision boards, we recite daily affirmations in the mirror,
We consciously, desperately say, I want to start my own successful business.
or I want to attract a deeply loving, secure partner. But so often, those intentions completely fail to materialize.
We end up procrastinating, self-sabotaging, or just spinning our wheels.
The materials argue that our failure isn't a lack of discipline. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of our own biology.
They call it the myth of just wanting it.
It is the ultimate blind spot in modern self-improvement. We operate under the assumption that because our conscious mind, specifically the logical, forward-thinking prefrontal cortex, wants a positive change, the rest of our biology will just naturally fall in line.
But the prefrontal cortex is just the tip of the iceberg. The nervous system is the ultimate, non-negotiable gatekeeper of your reality.
And the nervous system absolutely does not care about your vision board.
Not even a little bit. The nervous system cares about one thing and one thing only: predictability.
It equates predictability with safety and survival.
Your conscious mind can say, I want a massive promotion, immense wealth, and the public visibility that comes with it.
But if your nervous system looks at that new level of success, the increased responsibility, the potential for public criticism, and perceives it as a threat,
It will absolutely, unequivocally veto the intention.
the nervous system prioritizes the familiar over the positive every single time.
If your familiar historical baseline is struggling to pay bills, flying under the radar, and playing small, your nervous system considers that state to be safe.
Purely because you have survived it thus far.
Massive wealth and visibility represent the vast unknown, and to the primitive brain, the unknown is synonymous with danger.
I found the specific example the sources provided regarding the freeze response to be incredibly illuminating here.
The financial abundance example.
Yes, they detailed an individual who was attempting to manifest significant financial abundance. This person was doing all the conscious work, repeating the affirmations, visualizing the bank account, studying investment strategies.
Doing everything right on paper.
Exactly. But when they sat down to deeply somatically visualize holding that massive amount of wealth, they realized their physical body completely locked up.
They went into a profound state of energetic paralysis.
Their conscious mind was saying, yes, bring on the money. But their nervous system was screaming, danger, abort mission.
The body simply didn't recognize that level of money as a safe environment.
Perhaps in their childhood, money was the source of violent family conflict. Or perhaps they were taught that wealthy people are inherently corrupt and isolated.
Whatever the subconscious association was, the nervous system reacted to the intention of wealth as if a predator had entered the room.
To protect the person from this perceived threat, the nervous system actively sabotaged the intention.
It induced severe procrastination, massive brain fog, and a complete lack of motivation.
All designed to keep the person safely anchored in their familiar, financially lacking, but highly predictable comfort zone.
That physical freeze response is the biological veto in action. You cannot outthink or out-affirm a nervous system that feels actively threatened.
And the material provides a highly practical somatic exercise to help identify exactly where your own nervous system is throwing up these invisible roadblocks.
It's a body scan exercise that sidesteps the logical brain entirely.
Walk us through it. The instruction is to close your eyes, take a deep, regulating breath, and picture your absolute biggest desire, the exact intention you have been struggling for years to bring into reality.
You visualize it happening right now, in the present tense.
And as you hold that vivid image, you shift your attention entirely away from your thoughts and drop your awareness down into your physical body.
You scan yourself from head to toe. What is the immediate, involuntary physical sensation?
Does your body feel expansive, light, joyful, and open in the chest? Or do you suddenly notice a subtle tightness in your throat?
Is there a shallow, rapid panic in your breath? Does your stomach tie in knots, or do your shoulders tense up toward your ears?
That physical restriction, that immediate tightness, that is the exact location of the hidden block.
That is your nervous system slamming on the brakes.
The transcripts are uncompromising on this point. If the body says no, the intention will not materialize. The biological veto overrides the conscious desire every time.
So how do we negotiate with this stubborn biological bouncer?
Right. If we can't force our way through, what is the protocol?
The texts offer a strategy of incremental growth, and this is where I want to push back on the cultural narrative again.
Because we live in a world that idolizes the quantum leap.
The entrepreneur who risks everything, burns the boats, and becomes a millionaire overnight. The person who drops everything and moves to a new country.
We are taught to set massive, terrifying goals. We want to jump from making 10 units of income straight to 200 units overnight.
But this framework suggests that jumping from 10 to 200 is exactly what triggers the massive subconscious veto.
The gap is too wide. The unknown is too vast.
It trips the massive threat alarm, triggers the freeze response, and you end up paralyzed doing absolutely nothing.
The quantum leap narrative suffers from survivor bias. We hear about the one person whose nervous system somehow tolerated the massive shock.
But we don't see the thousands of others who completely collapsed under the biological stress of trying to force an impossible jump.
The strategy outlined in the transcripts to bypass the brain's alarm system is to stretch your window of tolerance gradually.
You have to prove to the primitive brain that growth is not lethal.
Instead of aiming for 200 units of income, which terrifies the nervous system, you aim for 15 units.
15 is a stretch. It requires effort, new skills, and a slight expansion of your comfort zone, but it is adjacent to the familiar.
It doesn't trip the existential threat alarm. You work toward 15. And when you safely achieve 15, an incredible biological adaptation occurs.
The brain realizes, oh, we achieved this new, slightly elevated level, and we didn't die. We weren't ostracized. We are safe here.
It structurally opens new neural pathways of possibility. Your fundamental baseline of safety moves up.
Once 15 is the new, boring, safe familiar, then you aim for 20, then 30.
You take gradual, digestible steps that continuously prove to the nervous system that expansion is safe.
Preventing the amygdala from hitting the panic button and shutting down your progress.
It is a profound practice of collaborating with your biology rather than constantly going to war with it.
That reframes the entire concept of failure.
You didn't fail at your massive goal because you lacked discipline or willpower. You failed because you spooked your nervous system.
So dial it back, regulate the system, and take a smaller step.
This understanding of the nervous system perfectly illuminates the deeply ingrained behavioral loops the transcripts analyze next.
They go deeply into unpacking the most common agonizing traps we find ourselves in.
And the first one they dissect is something almost everyone has experienced at some point: the illusion of hope.
Specifically in the context of the thought, they will change.
Picture this dynamic. You are in a romantic relationship that is objectively toxic. Your partner is chronically neglectful, perhaps emotionally volatile, or continually dismissive of your fundamental needs.
Your friends are begging you to leave.
Your own logical brain knows unequivocally that you should leave. You are profoundly miserable, yet you stay.
Sometimes for months, often for years.
Anchored by this persistent, completely irrational thought loop. If I just love them enough, if I'm just patient enough, if I could just explain my feelings one more time in exactly the right way, they will eventually realize my value and change.
Why does the human brain subject us to this torture?
It is one of the most devastating psychological traps, and the transcript connects the dots with absolute precision.
It explains that this intense, seemingly irrational, unyielding hope is not actually about the current adult partner at all.
It has virtually nothing to do with the person standing in front of you.
When you are locked in that agonizing waiting game, it is actually your unhealed inner child who has hijacked the control room.
That young, vulnerable part of your psyche is still desperately hoping that their parent, the original historical source of their unmet needs, will finally change.
Will finally attune to them and finally provide the unconditional love and safety they desperately craved but were denied.
Because the child was powerless and could never force the parent to change, the adult subconsciously seeks out a partner with identical emotional deficits.
The adult is attempting to succeed where the child failed.
They are trying to retroactively win the love of the parent by extracting it from the partner.
Therefore, the adult is playing out a historical childhood waiting game on a present-day adult stage.
The hope you feel isn't a rational assessment of your partner's potential for growth. It is a profound trauma response.
It is the echo of a terrified child refusing to accept the apocalyptic reality that the caregiver they entirely depend on is fundamentally incapable of providing the love they need to survive.
That is staggering. You are literally just trying to win a psychological battle you already lost when you're 5 years old.
It shifts the entire paradigm of the relationship.
It immediately moves the focus away from the exhausting cycle of how do I fix them to the terrifying but liberating question of what fundamental wound am I trying to heal within myself by staying here.
And this leads directly into the second major behavioral loop they identify, the pipeline from the overly mature child to the deeply angry adult.
There is a specific anecdote in the material about an individual who was universally praised throughout their childhood for being so mature for their age.
They never threw tantrums in the grocery store. They always helped manage the younger siblings. They were quiet, responsible.
They acted as the perfect little adult. But then, as they entered their late 20s and 30s, they developed into a deeply, inexplicably angry adult.
An adult who is easily triggered, constantly frustrated by minor inconveniences, and feels a seething, bubbling rage just beneath the surface of their daily interactions.
Our society endlessly praises the mature, easy child. But the sources reveal that this forced maturity is almost always a mask for profound emotional neglect.
The clinical psychology behind this dynamic is fascinating and tragically common in modern family structures.
When a child presents as exceptionally uncharacteristically mature, it rarely means they are just naturally enlightened.
It almost always means they were forced to parent their own parents.
Perhaps the parents were emotionally immature, caught in volatile conflict, dealing with addiction, or consumed by their own unresolved generational traumas.
The highly perceptive child intuitively reads the room and realizes that the family system is incredibly fragile.
They calculate that there is absolutely no space for their own childish needs, their own messy emotional outbursts, or their own demands for attention.
To keep the pace, to ensure the fragile ecosystem doesn't entirely collapse, the child actively suppresses their entire authentic self.
They become the emotional caretaker. They become the hyper-vigilant peacemaker.
They pay the ultimate devastating price, the forfeiture of their own childhood development, to maintain the illusion of family stability.
But the laws of physics apply to human emotion. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change form.
So what happens to all of that suppressed, vital emotion? What happens to the natural anger of a child who was never allowed to be upset?
It doesn't just evaporate into the ether. It ferments.
The analysis in the transcripts points out that the explosive adult anger is actually a delayed, entirely necessary rebellion.
It is a completely healthy, albeit deeply delayed, signal from that suppressed inner child finally fighting for survival.
The anger is bubbling to the surface, essentially screaming, I have boundaries, I have fundamental needs. When is it finally going to be my turn to be prioritized?
The societal instinct is to pathologize the anger, to view it as a character flaw or a failure of emotional regulation in the adult.
But the framework argues the opposite. The anger is the life energy of the original unified river finally demanding to be heard.
It is a sign of psychological life, desperately trying to break through the rigid, calcified armor of forced childhood compliance.
It is a massive and vital reframe. Instead of judging the anger, attempting to meditate it away, or suppressing it further with medication or shame, the individual must learn to decode it.
The anger is an incredibly accurate compass pointing directly toward the historical unmet needs.
If you follow the anger down to its root, you find the neglected child.
And this understanding of the primitive emotional brain brings us to the third behavioral loop, which addresses one of the most universally painful experiences a human can endure.
That they will come back, delusion.
The sources explore the agonizing, disorienting aftermath of a significant romantic breakup. We've all either witnessed this in a friend or lived through the agony ourselves.
A relationship definitively ends. The partner leaves, the box is packed, the door is shut. The reality is undeniable.
Yet, the person left behind develops an obsessive, entirely unshakable belief that the ex-partner will return.
They construct incredibly elaborate, fictional narratives about how the ex just needs time to figure themselves out.
Or how they will inevitably realize they made a terrible mistake. Why does the highly evolved human brain torture us with this blatant delusion when the stark reality is staring us right in the face?
The biological insight provided here is profound, and honestly, it gave me chills when I read it.
The transcripts explain that we have to look at how the primitive brain processes separation.
For a young child, abandonment is not just a sad, unfortunate emotional event. It is a literal biological death sentence.
A toddler left alone in the wilderness without a caregiver will rapidly perish.
Therefore, the primitive brain intrinsically equates the sudden loss of vital connection with biological death.
When an adult experiences a profound rejection or a sudden breakup, the nervous system doesn't just trigger appropriate adult sadness or grief.
It violently triggers that core, unhealed childhood wound of existential abandonment.
The emotional pain is so absolute, so overwhelmingly identical to the infant's pure terror of death, that the conscious psyche simply cannot tolerate the load.
If the adult were to fully, completely accept the permanent finality of the departure in that immediate moment.
They would be forced to simultaneously face the terrifying internalized childhood belief that they are fundamentally unlovable and therefore doomed to die alone.
The system assesses that processing the total reality of the abandonment would cause a complete psychological collapse.
So to protect the organism from shattering under the immense weight of that unbearable psychological agony, the brain deploys a heavy-duty shock absorber.
It actively manufactures the delusion they will come back.
The delusion is not a sign of weakness, foolishness, or a lack of intelligence. It is a highly sophisticated psychic life raft.
It acts as a buffer, keeping the absolute terror of existential abandonment at bay just long enough for the person's nervous system to continue functioning.
Just long enough for them to keep breathing, to keep getting out of bed, and to maintain basic biological functions.
Understanding this mechanism allows for immense, radical self-compassion.
You aren't crazy or pathetic for desperately hoping they come back. Your brain is just doing its job, desperately trying to keep you alive in the face of what it perceives as an emotional tsunami.
To genuinely heal from this, the individual doesn't just need to get over the ex-partner. They have to go underneath the breakup and address the original historical wound.
They must consciously reassure that terrified inner child that they are now safe.
That the adult self can survive on their own and that they are inherently worthy of love, regardless of who stays or who walks out the door.
This perfectly transitions our discussion from the theoretical diagnostics to the actual gritty mechanics of change.
We've thoroughly mapped the architecture of the problem.
We've talked about the splintered river of energy, the amygdala's obsessive casting, the nervous system's veto power, and the historical behavioral traps.
But what does this actually mean for you, listening right now?
How do we practically execute the change? How do we break the loop?
The source material is brutally, refreshingly honest here. It strips away all the toxic positivity of the self-help world.
It makes it abundantly clear. You cannot build a new, authentic, regulated life without feeling immense, profound discomfort.
Specifically, it argues that you cannot evolve without feeling acute guilt, paralyzing fear, and the terrifying visceral sensation that your foundational bonds to the people around you are going to completely shatter.
This is exactly where the theoretical framework collides with the physical reality of the human body.
Personal growth is so frequently marketed as a peaceful, blissful, Instagram-worthy journey of self-discovery.
You drink green juice, do some yoga, and magically become enlightened.
But the biological reality, as these texts accurately describe, is that setting new boundaries and changing your foundational survival behaviors is sheer agony.
They refer to it as the agony of the new.
When you have spent 30 years operating as a hyper-vigilant people-pleaser, chronically suppressing your own needs to regulate the emotions of everyone around you.
The act of finally speaking up feels like a violent violation of the natural order of the universe.
When you look at a demanding parent and say nay, or you tell a toxic partner this behavior is unacceptable to me, your nervous system doesn't view this as a healthy boundary.
It interprets this sudden rebellion as a massive critical threat to your survival. You were breaking the rules that kept you alive.
And the material is incredibly specific about the physical toll this takes.
It notes that the thymus gland, located in the upper chest, literally, physically reacts to this acute emotional stress.
People don't just feel mentally anxious. They experience a literal physical burning sensation, a severe tightness, or a heavy, crushing ache directly in the center of their chest.
It is the physical, somatic manifestation of pure guilt and biological terror. It feels like you are doing something terribly, fundamentally wrong.
Your entire nervous system is screaming, alarms are blaring, and your brain is pleading, apologize immediately, take it back.
Fix the relationship. Abandon the boundary before they abandon us.
But here is the absolute, non-negotiable golden rule from the material.
When you feel that intense burning in your chest, when every single cell in your body is urging you to revert to your old compliant behavior.
Like desperately sending that anxious follow-up text to smooth things over.
For caving in and say, you know what, it's fine, I'll just do it myself. You must hold your ground.
If you can simply push through that acute physical pain, if you can just sit with the agonizing discomfort of the boundary you just set without trying to fix the other person's reaction.
The body will eventually process the adrenaline. The sources outline that this acute burning panic usually peaks and then begins to subside after about 2 hours.
Within that window, the body's hormonal system slowly regulates.
The primitive brain looks around, realizes you haven't actually died from setting a boundary, and begins to release regulating hormones.
Slowly replacing the sheer terror with a profound grounding sense of structural empowerment.
And this brings us to what I consider to be the most practical, encouraging metric provided in the entire framework, the rule of 3.
We know the brain is incredibly neuroplastic, meaning it has the capacity to continuously rewire its synaptic connections based on new experiences.
But it requires concrete proof that the new behavior is actually safe.
The text suggests that you generally only have to hold this terrifying new boundary about 3 separate times in a specific dynamic before the body's hormonal and nervous system response completely rewires itself.
The very first time you say no to that demanding person, it feels like you are having a literal heart attack. The guilt is all-consuming.
The second time you hold the line, it feels like severe, highly uncomfortable anxiety, but you survive it.
The third time, you feel a spike of discomfort, but it is manageable. You don't lose sleep over it.
By the fourth time, an incredible biological shift has occurred.
The old, deeply myelinated, fear-based neural pathways have begun to physically die off from lack of use, a process called synaptic pruning.
Simultaneously, a robust new neural pathway of self-advocacy and safety has been established.
What used to cause a full-blown sweating panic attack becomes a calm, natural, almost boring boundary.
You have literally altered your cellular biology through sustained, conscious behavioral change.
The rule of 3. Just survive the burning chest 3 times. I love how tangible and measurable that is. It gives you a roadmap through the panic.
But to successfully survive those 3 times, we have to fully understand what the material calls true surrender.
Now, the word surrender carries a lot of baggage. We culturally associate it with giving up, waving the white flag, being weak, and passively accepting terrible treatment.
But in the context of this specific psychological framework, true surrender means something entirely different, and it is arguably the most powerful mechanism of the entire process.
True surrender is the conscious act of setting a necessary boundary, feeling utterly, deeply terrified that the other person might get furious or abandon you, and then deliberately, painfully releasing the need to control their reaction.
It is the absolute acceptance that you cannot manage their emotional state for them.
That is the ultimate crux of the work.
When you set a new boundary, your ego, driven by the terrified inner child, desperately wants to control the outcome.
It wants to carefully manage the delivery so the other person understands perfectly, agrees with your logic, validates your feelings, and, most importantly, isn't mad at you.
The ego wants a guarantee of safety.
True surrender is the agonizing process of relinquishing that guarantee. It is standing your ground and saying, this is my standard.
This is the baseline of what I require to remain healthy and engaged in this dynamic.
And then you step back and trust that the system, the broader mechanics of your life, will reorganize itself accordingly.
There are only 2 possible outcomes when you practice true surrender to a boundary.
In the first outcome, the person will respect the boundary, recognize your shifted frequency, transform their own behavior, and rise to meet your new standard, thereby elevating the entire relationship.
In the second outcome, they will be entirely unable or unwilling to meet you at that new level of health, and they will naturally be removed from your life.
While the second outcome inevitably causes profound grief, the transcripts argue that it's ultimately a painless removal in the grand scheme of your life's trajectory.
It is necessary pruning. It clears the stagnant debris from your life to make room for the people, the opportunities, and the experiences that actually match your newly established, healthier frequency.
You literally stop blocking the flow of your own river.
You let the dead branches fall away.
But keeping that river flowing clear requires consistent upkeep. You don't just set a boundary once, have a massive breakthrough, and then float on a cloud of enlightenment forever.
One thing I found absolutely crucial in the notes regarding daily maintenance was the emphasis on a dedicated physical and mental practice.
Transformation isn't just a cognitive exercise you do while reading a book or listening to a discussion like this. It is an ongoing biological process that requires rigorous daily support.
The materials heavily recommend a dedicated meditation practice,
Specifically noting that while 10 or 15 minutes is a great start for calming the immediate nervous system, aiming for 40 minutes a day is where the deep, profound neural shifts really take root.
Meditation is the practice that creates the necessary space between stimulus and response.
It is what allows you to observe the amygdala's frantic stage play, recognize the historical actors being cast, and deliberately choose not to jump on stage and act out the old script.
Furthermore, the texts are adamant that the physical body must be deeply integrated into the healing process.
Because trauma and emotional memory are not just stored in the brain.
They are deeply embedded in the physical tissues, the fascia, and the peripheral nervous system. Purely cognitive understanding is fundamentally insufficient.
You can understand your trauma perfectly and still be entirely controlled by it if the energy remains trapped in the body. You must physically move and release the bound-up energy.
The sources specifically point to somatic movement practices, like yoga, to systematically stretch and release the chronic tension and historical trauma physically trapped in the muscular architecture.
They also heavily emphasize the necessity of grounding techniques to regulate the electrical charge of the nervous system.
And urge a hypervigilance regarding what you consume.
And this isn't just about nutrition. It is about the media you absorb, the environments you place yourself in, and the emotional frequency of the people you allow into your inner circle.
Your physical body is the biological vehicle for your consciousness. If that vehicle is continuously clogged with environmental stress, poor inputs, and physical neglect, the mind simply cannot maintain the massive energetic demands of its newfound clarity and boundaries.
Healing is a relentless, holistic, daily commitment to maintaining the new neural architecture you have fought so incredibly hard to build.
Let's take a deep breath because we have covered massive, dense ground today.
We really have journeyed deep into the biological and psychological architecture of our own minds. To recap the core of this framework, we started by exploring the vivid metaphor of the splintered river.
Understanding how the innocent, biologically necessary adaptations of a helpless infant cause us to sever our connection to our authentic life energy.
We learned that the foundational core wound is almost always the internalized belief of "I am unworthy," rather than the terrifying truth that my environment is flawed.
We unmasked the amygdala, realizing it functions not just as a simple threat detector, but as an obsessive casting director, constantly recreating our past relational traumas so we can finally close the loop and heal them.
We discovered the brutal reality that our nervous system acts as a stubborn, uncompromising bouncer, vetoing our conscious goals and intentions if it perceives the unknown as a threat to our survival.
And we learned how to systematically sneak past that bouncer, using the strategy of incremental growth to expand our window of tolerance.
We also dissected the deeply painful behavioral loops that keep us paralyzed. The irrational illusion that a toxic partner will change, which we now understand is just the desperate echo of an inner child waiting for a parent.
The delayed, explosive rebellion of the overly mature, parentified child who finally discovers their suppressed life energy through anger.
And the deeply protective, biological delusion of hoping an ex will return, deployed by the brain to stave off the psychological equivalent of infant death by abandonment.
And finally, we confronted the brutal but beautiful mechanics of true transformation.
We acknowledged the biological reality that setting boundaries physically hurts, that the thymus gland will literally burn with guilt.
But that if we hold the line, employing the rule of three and practicing the profound release of true surrender, we literally prune old neural pathways.
Wire new ones and permanently alter the physical structure of our reality. It is deeply empowering, it is undeniably daunting, and it is entirely within your grasp to execute.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought.
A new concept to mull over as you go about your week, building on the mechanics we've just discussed. Think about the one frustrating pattern that keeps repeating in your life, the one you just can't seem to break.
Now ask yourself, if this pattern were actually a protective shield designed by a terrified 5-year-old version of you, what exactly is it trying to protect you from?
And what would happen if you finally told that 5-year-old that the war is over and it's safe to step out from behind the shield?
What an incredible responsibility and what a profound opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us on this intense, revealing exploration. We hope this deep dive has provided you with a powerful, compassionate new lens through which to view your own beautifully complex mind. We are wishing you a week of profound self-discovery, rigorous self-compassion, and most of all, bold, unapologetic, life-altering boundaries. Until next time, keep diving deep.